Hello and welcome to the BCU Alumni podcast. I'm Beth from BCU's Alumni team, and in each episode we welcome different members of our alumni community back onto campus. Today we are live streaming on YouTube, Facebook and Instagram, so thank you to those watching from wherever you are in the world. In this special episode, I'm delighted to be joined by BCU's Alumnus of the Year, Casey Bailey. Born and raised in Nechells in Birmingham, Casey was the Birmingham Poet Laureate from 2020 to 2022, and he has performed both nationally and internationally. His full poetry collection, Please Do Not Touch, was published in 2021, and it was adapted into a play which was on stage at Coventry's Belgrade Theatre in September 2024. His debut play, GrimeBoy, also enjoyed a sold-out run at the REP in Birmingham in 2022. Casey was commissioned by the BBC to write the Ballad of the Peaky Blinders in 2019, which won a Webby Award, and in 2022 he won a Royal Television Society Award for a film for his poem Dear Brum. Casey graduated from BCU with an MA in Education in 2017. He is now the assistant head teacher at Idsall School in Shropshire. In his role, he aims to address barriers for students having access to or engaging with the curriculum. He has worked in several schools supporting their development, school culture and behaviour, as well as working within his own community. And if all that wasn't enough, Casey is also an established musician and runs his own rap workshops. In this episode, we will be discussing Casey's remarkable life so far and how a boy from Nechells has managed to captivate his city through poetry, education and music. As we are live streaming on YouTube, Facebook and Instagram, if you have any questions for Casey, just pop them in the chat and we will answer them at the end. So Casey, thanks so much for being on the BCU Alumni podcast today. So going to university then, working in education, being a poet, a performer, a Brummie icon, none of it was ever really on the cards. So you had a tough time at school, but you had big dreams of being a rapper or a teacher. You've somehow remarkably managed to do both and a lot more. So can you tell me about how and where you grew up?
First of all, hello, Bethan. That's a big introduction. So I grew up in Nechells, not very far from where we are right now. And yeah, you're right. When I was younger, I did want to be a teacher and or a rapper. I probably never thought at the time you could be a teacher and a rapper.
Yeah.
Some days I still question whether that's a thing or not. I think most teachers will tell me it's not, and every rapper will tell me it's not. But yeah, I grew up in Nechells, inner city Birmingham. It's an area that I loved growing up in. I had a great time growing up there, but it is an area that, you know, in the time I was growing up there, had massive issues around deprivation, around gangs, around crime. And it, in many ways, I enjoyed it because I was just living my wild and reckless life. And in many ways, it was preparing me for lots of the other things that I was going to do in life in one way or another. And I think, you know, I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine earlier today about the idea of perspective. And often when I find myself in what feels like a difficult position or an uncomfortable position, I have the perspective of actually I've seen worse, I've been through worse, I've came out the other side of worse. So I never feel in this kind of world that I live in now and exist in now as the teacher who does some rapping and writes some poems, and I might be sitting down talking to you or having a conversation with somebody from the council or whatever. There never feels any real jeopardy on it for me because it's like I've survived actual difficult situations.
So like you said, you obviously grew up with gang and knife crime happening around you, but you did leave school with several qualifications and you went to college. So at what point was it then that you chose to go to university?
I guess kind of I flowed through lots of things. I didn't really make decisions as such. I just kind of like, well, what happens next? And I think for me, I was going out with a girl and she was going to university and it felt like a good idea to do whatever she was doing at the time. And many, many years later, she's now my wife. So
it all worked out.
So I've made many bad decisions in my life. I've never rated myself as a decision maker, but that was a very good decision. And I think I didn't know what I wanted to do at university. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Weirdly, as I say, when I was 13 years old, I knew I wanted to teach maths and I wanted to be a rapper. When I was 18 years old, looking at universities, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. And weirdly, when I started university, I was about 8 weeks into the course and I was doing physical education and sports studies. And the lecturer said after the break, like a half-term type break, we're going to be teaching kids from the local primary school. We're going to be doing these sports activities with them, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And she was like, what do you mean you don't want to do that? I was like, I don't want to teach the kids from the local primary school. She was like, but you're on a course to train to be a PE teacher. And I said, oh, am I? So I was like 8 weeks into university. I didn't even know what my course was.
Wow.
But we worked it out in the end. And they were great kids. And I realised maybe this teaching PE thing could be good.
Yeah. So you graduated from Worcester University before you made your way over to BCU. So can you tell me about what happened kind of during that time then, the roles you were in and how you ended up studying at BCU?
Yeah, so I did my undergrad at Worcester, and part way through I was living my wonderful, interesting life, and got in a little bit of trouble. And one of my lecturers said, don't bother applying for the PGCE at Worcester. You won't get on. And I was hot about end of the first semester of my third year, and the same lecturer came to me and said, you haven't applied for the PGCE yet. And I was like, yeah, because you told me not to. She was like, yeah, that was like a year and a half ago. And basically the point I was trying to actually make was you need to sort yourself out if you want to be on the PGCE. So I applied and I got on. And I trained to be a teacher at Worcester. And then I was at Q3 Academy in Birmingham. I taught for 2 years in Coventry. I was at Q3 Academy in Birmingham, and when I first got there, they said, we have a master's course set up, linked with BCU. The school will fully fund the master's if you're willing to show up to the seminars and do the work and do whatever the research projects are. And in my head, I was like, surely everybody is doing this master's. I'm going to show up. It's going to be in the big lecture theatre at school, and there's going to be 100 members of staff. And I showed up to the first session, there were 6 people. And I was like, everyone's not taking a free master's. Like, what? And it's weird because we're all teachers, so we all see the value in education, you'd imagine. So I was confused. I thought, is it going to be, it's not that good, or am I going to realise there's a reason why people don't do it? To this day, I can't tell you why people don't do it, because one of the best things I've done as a teacher to look at, it's easy, it's like anything, it's easy when you're teaching to get lost in it and just day by day just do what you do, and not really think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it. And for me, the masters at BCU gave me space to breathe and say, what am I trying to achieve? And are the steps that I'm taking actually working towards achieving it, or am I just getting through period 1 to period 5, go home, sleep, come back, do it tomorrow? And so I was really fortunate. Q3 Academy put me onto a master's for free. I've been grateful since.
So what do you do in your role now as an assistant head teacher? And obviously I said in the intro that you help to address barriers for students struggling to engage with the curriculum. So what kind of goes into that?
So my official role is assistant head teacher in charge of behaviour and attitudes. And so realistically, everything that sits outside of the day-to-day running of the curriculum is what I lead on in school. So that could be around students' behaviour, it could be around students struggling to access school in general, the curriculum, and it's really around what interventions can we put in place, what support can we put in place. The worst part of my job is what punishments or sanctions get put in place when kids get things wrong. And I have all those fun meetings with parents who are saying, this is what happened, or you've got the wrong end of the stick, or are you sure that this is what went on? And to me, I was the kind of kid at school who would have spent a lot of time being either supported by or dealt with by the person who does my job now. And I always say, and I stand by it, I've never taught at a school that wouldn't have kicked me out as a student. So I take that responsibility really seriously, because I never want to be in a position where I'm taking lightly the fact that a decision that I make or the process that I follow could lead to a student not being in school anymore. And that to me is the worst possible outcome, and it's always something that I'm trying to work and steer away from.
So what were you like at school then?
I was a terror. Hands down, I was a terror. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 19 years old. And before then, people like me are the reason why people don't get diagnosed with ADHD when they should, because I'm like the archetypal negative stereotype. Or I'm not now, I like to think, but at school I was angry, I was shouting at everybody got swore at, all kind of language that I can't use right now, and it was daily, and that's who I was and how I was. And in hindsight, I realised lots of the stuff that I thought this is what you must be if you're ADHD, that was just an angry boy with ADHD. And so lots of shouting, lots of swearing, lots of getting kicked out of class, some fighting, and all kinds of stuff that I hope none of my children ever do at school.
So, I mean, it's really hard now to imagine you as not being the celebrated poet that you are today. But obviously the opportunity for you to explore this side of yourself actually came about by chance. So can you tell me a bit about how a school trip then actually managed to kind of change the whole course of your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying when I was in school, I was also a sensational grime MC. So I've always been a celebrated poet. But no, no, but I was working at a school in Coventry, and we went on a trip. Me and a friend of mine called Sarah, who I worked with at the time, and me and Sarah had this room, and it was called the Nurture Room. And Sarah did essentially drama therapy, and I was a positive behaviour coordinator working with students with all kinds of issues going on with them, and students who needed support and students who needed challenge and all that stuff. And so we went on this trip, and the trip was bizarre. Lots about the trip was just weird, but it was basically a residential. And at that place, there was a poet who wrapped up every day for the whole trip. So all the different schools who were there, and he would do a poem to say, this is the end of the day and this is what's happened. And I said really flippantly to the kids I was with, I said, "Oh, I could do that." And they were like, "No, you can't." So I was like, "Well, I can, I absolutely can." And they said, "All right then, so do it at dinner this evening." So we get to dinner, and I do this little poem about one of the students had fell and injured her arm, and something else had happened. So I pull it all in, and I said, "That's really good." And I was like, "Thanks." I do write some stuff. And then Sarah had tried to get this poet to do a workshop for a Pauline Quirk Academy that she ran, and he was talking about how much he was going to charge, and it was an awful lot of money. And she was like, "I don't have that kind of budget." And I said to her, "I could run that workshop for you. Just absolute, just youth, ego and hubris, and no backing behind it."
Yeah.
And one day she called me and said, "Do you think you could run a workshop?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Do you think you could do it today?" And I was like, "What?" She was like, "Yeah, because my film and TV person is not in, and the session's starting in an hour." I was like, "Yeah, okay."
Yeah.
So I went. The session was filmed and sent to a conference that they were doing, and next thing I know, I was a masterclass provider for Pauline Quirk Academy of Performing Arts. And it's weird. My brother, who is like my brother's in like food and drinks, but he is like a connoisseur of everything he deals with. He takes it very seriously. He's a perfectionist. And because of that, he's excellent at what he does. And he said to me, "Why would anyone want a poetry workshop from you?" It's like, because they're good. And he said, "Yeah, no, granted, probably. But what's your reputation? Who are you for me to want a poetry workshop from you?" I thought, that's a really good question. And so then I started getting into the world of poetry, so performing my poetry, sharing my poetry. Weirdly, very backwards. Whereas the normal way of doing things is you establish yourself as anything, and then you start delivering workshops. I kind of started delivering these workshops, and then went about trying to establish myself. And now we're here talking about why did I start writing poems, or why did I do any of this? So yeah, all the rest is history, as they say.
So what did people think when you said, "I'm going to be a poet now"?
It's interesting because I'll never forget doing A-level PE and my teacher, Mr. Wilkinson, saying he was trying to teach us about socio-economic factors affecting how people get into sport. And he said, if Casey goes back to Nechells and says he's been doing horse riding, they'll flipping kneecap him. And I thought, fair, probably would.
Yeah.
Not far removed from saying I'm a poet now.
Yeah.
It's not what people say where I come from. And I'll never forget being at a funeral. And there were some people that I hadn't seen in years, and they knew me as the angry young man who I just spoke about, and as a grime MC. And somebody was like, "Oh, he does poems now." And they were like, "Poems, blood? You do poems, fam? What do you mean, poems?" And I was like, poems, poems. And there were lots of laughter, and lots of people didn't take it seriously, and probably didn't take me seriously. But fortunately, I was a long way away from a time when I was concerning myself with other people's opinions of what I was doing. So So I was like, yeah, I do poems. And then I saw one of them about a year later after I'd done the Peaky Blinder poem. And they were like, I saw that Peaky Blinder poem. And I was like, well, I do poems.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of people were confused and a bit like, why would you do that? But people who knew me best and who knew me longest know that all I've ever done is just play around with words.
Yeah.
All I've ever really wanted to do was play around with words. So the idea of me writing anything just makes sense.
Yeah. So when you were kind of obviously like establishing yourself and stuff, were you doing things like open mic nights? Like, were you kind of having to really kind of practice, kind of discover what kind of poet you are, how you perform? Like, what kind of went into that?
100%. I was at every open mic night I could be at, and I loved it. I still do love it. The difference is now I have 3 children and lots of random stuff to do. But before then, I would always be at open mic nights. I got into a phase where I could only write if I'd seen poets or if I'd read poetry, like really recently. And so it was where I was getting all my inspiration, and it was where I realised there were lots of different types of poets. So my good friend Amira, I remember me and her talking about poetry that rhymes or doesn't rhyme. And at the time I was like, if it doesn't rhyme, it's not a poem. That was it.
Wow, right, okay.
If it doesn't rhyme, it's not a poem.
Right.
She was like, what? And we went back and forth, and she challenged me. She said, write a poem that doesn't rhyme. And I wrote this poem. I can't say I love it anymore. But when I wrote it, I was like, because I'm freeing myself of all of the idea of rhyming and making that work, I was writing better than I felt like I'd ever written before. And I remember I sent it to her, and she was like, this is poetry. Right. I was like, okay, thanks. And yeah, I was, as you say, I was literally just discovering who I was as a poet, because really when I came into poetry as a rapper who was basically slowing rap down and calling it poetry.
Yeah.
And then over time, I started to try and understand and really master or capture rather than master the forms and the ideas behind poetry.
So where do you get your inspiration from then?
I think just life. Like, we live in a world that is multifaceted. There's always something happening. There are always great things happening. There are always bad things happening. There's always something to observe and to capture. And I think some of my favourite poets are poets who capture like what feel like really mundane and simple things, and they capture them in a way where like it opens your eyes to it. So there's a poet called Caleb Femi who has just really recently brought out a book called The Wickedest, which captures like a shubs, a house party, minute by minute through the night. And when I read that book, there are moments where I'm just like, I've seen this moment happen, but the way you're capturing it is transforming it into something totally different. And so every day there is inspiration for a poem in everything we do. And then other than that, it's just reading. I just read poetry all the time because that's how you develop that language and that understanding of poetry.
So who are some of your favourite poets and writers then? If people are watching who are like, I really want to get into poetry but I don't even know where to start, who would you kind of suggest?
Definitely Caleb Femi. There's a poet called Ollie O'Neill who I love. Her work is my favourite example of that observational poetry. She could write about anything and you would capture it in a way that it'll blow your mind. Yomi Sade, amazing poet. And really before poetry, I always read fiction. So I'm an Ian Rankin fan, crime fiction, a Walter Mosley fan. But yeah, in terms of poetry, I definitely recommend Caleb Femi. I definitely recommend Ollie O'Neill, Yomi Sade, Amira Saleh. Great poets, yeah.
So how did you become the Birmingham Poet Laureate then?
Well, if you get yourself in enough trouble. So it's weird because it's like lots of other things. It's just an application process, and you say, I want to be the Birmingham Poet Laureate, and there's a whole thing of like who is audacious enough to say that they want to be the Birmingham Poet Laureate. And I applied and I didn't get it. And I remember.
What year was that?
Oh, that was before I got it. So 2018 to 2020. Okay. And I had, at that time, I'd published a pamphlet of poetry, and I'd been around and done some open mics. I didn't have my full collection out, and I hadn't done lots of the commissions that I'd done.
Right.
but I was kind of, I was okay with the idea. I didn't get it. I got shortlisted. I was surprised I was shortlisted at the time. And I just went back to the idea of just working away and doing what I was enjoying. And when I applied the next time, it was for the 2022. You had an interview process. You had to read a poem, somebody else's poem, and talk about why it's a great poem or whatever. Read some of your own poetry, and then what did you think being the Poet Laureate was about, or what did you want to do? Right. And I always said I wanted to bring poetry to Birmingham and bring Birmingham to poetry. So to me, there were lots. There's a saying, I heard it from Benjamin Zephaniah. I don't know if he said it first or somebody else said it, but it's that most people don't check for poetry because poetry doesn't check for most people. Poetry is not there for everybody. It feels like it's trying to lock people out a lot of the time. And so I wanted to write poetry and to share poetry, other people's poetry, that I felt like was an invitation to say to Birmingham, poetry's for us. Yeah. At the same time, I wanted to be outside of Birmingham saying this is what poetry looks like in Birmingham. And that was my aim and my goal. And I feel like, we had some good times and I was really happy and excited with what we did. I say we, it was just me, but but it was good. It was really, really good.
So you've been commissioned by everyone now,
lots
really.
Of people. Yeah.
From Symphony Hall, Birmingham Library, Royal Shakespeare Company, the BBC, even BCU. Mm-hmm. So can you tell me about some of your biggest highlights then as a poet over the past few years?
Yeah. The Peaky Blinders one was huge. Yeah. So I remember, the weird thing is, this is when the many faces of Casey Bailey all meet in one place. So I was in an after-school club for a group of students who it was called Futures, and it was about them doing the best that they could after school. It was a group that I'd selected of students who I thought had loads of potential and also the potential to not realise it. And my phone rang. I wasn't going to answer it. And I thought, my colleague was there, was a good friend of mine. And I said, can you just watch the group for a sec? He says, yes. So I answer the phone. Hi, Casey, it's such and such from the BBC. Blah, blah. And they just start talking, and I'm like, it's the BBC. So you take the call and you have the conversation. Yeah. And they said, do you watch the Peaky Blinders? I said, yeah, I'm a big fan of the Peaky Blinders. And they said, yeah, well, we'd like you to write a piece for the show. And I was like, what? And I remember we had this big conversation about it. I got off the phone and I went back in and I'm talking to the group. My phone rings again and I answered the phone and the woman said, I realised, Casey, we didn't discuss a fee. Like I'd just gone, yep, I'll absolutely write the Peaky Blinders poem. Forgot to say, what are you going to pay me or anything like that? When do you need it? I was like, yes, I will write the Peaky Blinders poem. And I remember probably the biggest kind of achievement around that was when we did the second one. They told me when we did the first one, they do a different thing every year in the build up to the show. Right. So they had artwork, they've had animations, they've had all this stuff. Yeah. But they never do the same thing. So when they came around to the next series and they called me and said, can you write something for the show again? I was like, oh, okay, I thought you never did the same thing. I was like, well, we're going to do it again. Yeah. And I felt really blessed and privileged around that. And then I was invited to write a poem or commissioned to write a poem where I was flown out to Cannes to read the poem at the site of the Cannes Film Festival. Wow. And literally I remember they flew me out. I landed. There was a woman with a very nice Jaguar. She had my name on a board, Casey Bailey. She says, I'm your driver. I says, okay. And she took me to the hotel I was staying in and she said, I said, oh, what are you going to do for the rest of the afternoon? She said, I'm going to be here. I said, what do you mean? She says, I'm your driver for the next 48 hours. I don't go anywhere unless you want to go somewhere. Oh, my God. I was like, oh, my God. So I said, so you're just going to wait outside the hotel? She was like, yeah, just in case. It's like, wow. So that was a pretty wild and special experience. Yeah. And then I got to perform in India, and that was amazing. And I remember, where we were performing in India, the festival was run by the local media company. Mm-hmm. So it would be like the Birmingham Mail running a literature festival in Birmingham. Right. And so all of their newspapers in the build-up had been about this festival. Yeah. So I land in India, in Kerala, and get out of the bus at the hotel. And one of the people who works in the hotel goes, you're Casey Bailey? I was like, I know. But they all knew because it had been all in the local press. So it was really weird because I was in a different country. I was getting recognised more than if I walked through the middle of Birmingham.
Yeah.
They were going to me, "Oh, you're Casey Bailey. You're the poet. You're the poet." I was like, I am the poet. I am the poet.
Yeah.
And they ran this big thing when I was there. They took a photo of me. It said, "Casey Bailey, the poet of Birmingham." I was like, I don't know if all the other poets are going to be happy, but I'm taking it.
Yeah, I'll take that.
And that was, I think, before I became the Poet Laureate as well. So that was quite cool. So yeah, that was amazing to be able to be flown to India, all expenses covered, to read. I read with an amazing Indian poet called Madhu and a Tibetan poet. And we were on this panel and we're talking about poetry as protest and all of this stuff. And I'm like, this is bizarre. And I read a poem there called Viceroy, which is about the Viceroy to India, which is something that Britain put in place many years ago. And it was like, the poem's like very anti-colonialism and all this stuff. And there were people coming up to me saying, I'm Indian, I've lived in India all my life. And I never knew that was a thing until I heard your poem. And I was like, God, like, here we are, start a revolution. But it turns out Britain have left India a long time ago, so I was a bit late. But yeah, it was amazing.
I remember you telling me not long ago actually about that huge piece of work that you did at Symphony Hall.
Oh yeah.
What was that?
Beyond the Bricks of Brum.
Beyond the Bricks of Brum, that's it.
Beyond the Bricks of Brum. Man, that was such an amazing project to be a part of. And I remember there was an element of, you know, when people say you never miss a meeting at work because you end up with more work. Because everyone goes, oh yeah, Bethan will do it. Bethan will do that, won't she? Of
course.
Casey will pick that up. He'll pick that up. Casey will send that email. Casey will write that thing.
Yeah.
And I missed a meeting, and then it turned out I kind of didn't know exactly what it was that I was doing. So I spoke to Chris at Symphony Hall at B Music. Chris is amazing, Chris Proctor.
A fellow graduate.
Well, you know, all the best people. And Chris was like, I said to Chris, I've been thinking about what we might do. And he said, could you send over an idea? And I thought, I don't know exactly what I'm doing. As in, why am I sending an idea? I didn't know I was supposed to come up with an idea. Right. So I went away and come up with this idea. And I sent it over. And I thought, I did that thing where, I don't know if anyone else does this, so maybe I'm just exposing myself. I did that thing where you send like a rough idea and think people will say, oh no, maybe we could add this or take away that or do this. Yeah. And then you'll get to where you're going. I sent it over, people are like, yeah, great. Love it. So what we do now, flesh it out. So I was like, oh, okay. So I went back to it. And ended up going back and forth with Jules Buckley, who is an amazing composer. Yeah. And creating this vision for a 90-minute music and poetry experience with the BBC Symphony Orchestra and 90-something piece orchestra. And it was amazing. Because I like to live 9 different lives, didn't get to go to Maida Vale to rehearse. Didn't get to do most of the rehearsals at Symphony Hall. So the first time I'd seen the orchestra was 24 hours before the performance. Wow. At a sound check. And I remember being on the stage, and I always tend to dress in all black. I don't always, but I often dress in all black. And I was on stage in like a pair of black cargos and a black t-shirt, and this violinist walked up to me and asked me, could I move the microphone pack on her chair? Yeah. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. And I realised she thought I was a techie. She thought I was one of the sound techs, because this is how you black cargos, black t-shirts, that's how you dress when you fix the wires and sort the music out. The important people dress like that, not the people who stand up and do random poems. Yeah. So I was like, I've got no idea how to do that. I don't even know how to sort my microphone out. And which is a lie, but still. And then she realised about 2 minutes later, somebody goes over like a speaker system, Casey, are you ready to sound check? And I look up and go, yep. And I see his violinist go, no. Like, I was just asking, he's the guy who's wrote the whole plan. I'm like, yeah. I think the violinist needs her sound pack moving, but other than that, we're ready to go. Yeah. And I remember walking out on the first night, and the other thing that happened is on sound check, I'm meant to hear Jules count me in. Mm. So he goes, Casey, in 3, 2, 1, I start, and then the orchestra starts, and that like opens the show. But I couldn't hear him. So the first time I heard his voice was for the live performance. Symphony Hall, hundreds of people in there, 90-something piece orchestra on stage, and I walk out and I'm like, if I don't hear his voice, I just have to start. I just have to pick a point and start. But they are prepared to play this whole piece 90 minutes through. There's no stop for them, really. So it's like, if I mess the timing up, I mess up everybody's timing. And I remember walking out and I heard, and Casey in 3, and I was like, thank God. I've never been happier to hear someone's voice than Jules Buckley on that day. And just next thing you know, it was done. Next thing you know, you're walking off stage and people are going, that was really good. And I'm going, is it done? Has it happened?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was amazing.
That is interesting, though, what you said about the violinist. Like, what does a poet look like now? No?
Everyone.
Exactly.
Everyone and no one. We can pick each other out in the crowd.
Oh, do you think you like intrinsically know? Like, you're a poet.
You're a poet.
So what is it that you love most about poetry and performance then? And I guess also, what has it been like to see it really become this huge career for you?
I think what I like most about writing is, as I said, I've always had a thing for words. I always try and turn something into an unnecessary analogy. There's always like a little play on words. It could be a rhyme, it could be a metaphor, and that's just how I think. Like, that's how my brain processes things. So I was older than probably you'd expect when I realised other people are interested in the way that I phrase things or the way that I say things. And so for me, just the opportunity, first of all, just to play with words myself, I love. The fact that other people take something from it is amazing. And I think what I realised, there's a poem that I've got called Dear Birmingham, which was like the predecessor for Dear Brum.
Okay.
And there's a line in it about Longbridge and the difficulties of people kind of dealing with the fallout of Rover closing and all that kind of stuff. And the line is quite flippant. It's not as heavy as it could be, considering, the magnitude of what happened there.
Yeah.
But a woman came up to me afterwards and she was crying her eyes out and she said, my husband worked at the Longbridge plant and you mentioning that just means the world. And I thought, gosh, you can really say something that is going to have a massive impact on people. And that, to me, I guess favourite's probably the wrong word, but what I find the most powerful about it is when I perform a poem and someone comes up to me and said, that poem made me think of my brother, or that poem expresses exactly how I felt at this point in time. And I write a lot of sad poems. I've got a reputation for being the happiest poet with the saddest poems. And people often come up to me and say, you wrote that poem about that thing and I needed to hear that. Or I've always felt like that, but never knew it was like that until you've said it. And that to me is the real magic of it, because performing's fun. And going back to what I said about growing up in Nechells, lots of people find performing really nerve-wracking or stressful, but nothing bad's going to happen. That's my opinion. It was always my opinion. And I remember I did a performance there was a boy I used to teach, and he asked me to do a performance for a cancer charity. And he was like, set up his own little gig. He was in a pub in Coventry, and he was like, I want you to come and perform. And I was like, okay, no worries. And I'd done 2 poems, and this woman sitting about 2 meters from me was like, for God's sake, is he going to stop? And I was like, and God. I did another poem, and then I did stop. And I said to the boy, I said, like, that woman's so rude. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry, she's my auntie. I was like, so she's here to support your fundraising for this charity. But I was just like, what the hell? But again, now if I tell that story, I think that's hilarious. And I have this thing as a teacher where I say, your worst day in the classroom is your funniest story at the pub. And the same thing applies. The same thing applies with poetry. Like, if I fall over on stage, it's not going to be funny on stage, but I'll find it funny later. And lots of people can't find those things funny, which I get. Yeah. But I have to. And I think, as I say, I grew up in a place where, when things went wrong, they went really, really wrong. Yeah. And there were things that you could never come back from. Nothing's ever happened to me on stage that I can't come back from. I can't see anything. I mean, unless I do a really dreadful performance, I'll come back in one way or another. Yeah. And so, I love performing because you can see there's something about saying a line and seeing the people in the room go, or like, and and it lands, and you see that person. I'm doing a poem about mental health, and that person, clearly there's something about what I've said that connects. I'm doing a poem about my mother passing away, and I can see that person over there. This is really landing. Doing a poem about my wife's experience of childbirth, and you can see people going, and those moments there's nothing better than that.
Did the students you teach know about this whole other side to you?
To a certain extent, yes. And as someone I used to work with, who used to call it espionage, but she didn't mean espionage. She meant, like, I don't know, moonlighting or something other than espionage, something other than being a spy. And now we joke that it's espionage. And it sometimes felt like espionage, because it would be like, we're in school until 5 o'clock because we've got a specific meeting, but on this particular day I've got to get out at 3:15 because I'm on stage at 5 o'clock actually. So it would be a bit like, can I get away with it? And so some kids know, some kids follow it like quite closely. And like, oh, sir, you did this thing, didn't you? And I'm like, I did, yes. I'll never forget when I was at Q3, I got named one of Birmingham's 30 under 30.
Right.
And I go into school, and this kid's walking down the corridor, and he goes, "Oi, Bailey." I turn around and say, "Yes." And he goes, "I saw you in the newspaper." And I'm like,
yeah.
Yeah. And he goes, "He said you were young." Like, pure confusion. I was like, wicked, thanks. Leveler there, just bring you back down to earth. If anyone will humble you, it's a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
So I was like, wicked, yeah, wow. I said, maybe they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they pick up glimmers and little bits and pieces. I did a workshop at my last school, and we were writing a piece for like the whole trust. Conference.
Right.
And I had kids from all over the different schools in the trust, and we were writing to the Ed Sheeran "Take Me Back to London" instrumental.
Okay.
The remix version. And one of the days I called JK, and I say, "JK, can you talk to the kids?" And they're like, "You don't know JK, you don't know JK." So I call him up on WhatsApp. I'm like, "Jay," he's like, "We're saying, bro, you're good? Yeah. Can you like tell these kids that they're doing great or whatever?" And he's like, "Listen, kids, just, stay in school, listen to Mr. Bailey." I'm like, wicked. Cheers, Jay. And off he goes. And they're like, "Sir, you know JK, man, you know JK." I was like, well, I knew that I knew JK before I called him, funnily enough. But yeah, so different kids who care to pay attention. But the reality is, I'm a teacher in their school. And when you're a teacher in school, you're just a boring person, aren't you? You're just a boring old man walking around the school. And I like that. I can live with that. I can live with the anonymity of being the boring old man walking around school.
Yeah, I think that's funny now. Obviously, when I look back at school, and I'm like, I just can't imagine any of my teachers having lives outside of work. And yet now I'm friends with loads of teachers. I'm like, of course they've got loads going on more than
just think of your maths teacher and then think of him being a rapper. Doesn't make sense, does it? And I performed at the Creative Industry Awards last week.
Yeah.
And I bumped into one of my old students who's not acting now. And she put something on Instagram saying, "My math teacher's cooler than yours." Like with a video of me performing, and people are like, who's that? I'm like, someone I taught. Yeah. Someone I taught. She's a legend. So, yeah.
Brilliant. So you're actually one of the judges on our new competition.
I am indeed.
It's called BCU Presents Benjamin's F&I Future Writers. 2 weeks left to enter, which has gone around really quickly. So what advice would you give then to any kind of budding writers or poets keen to take part? Have you kind of got any like top tips for them?
My top tips for any writer is step one, read loads, because you start to immerse yourself in the language of writing, particularly poetry, but similarly with short stories. If you haven't read a load of short stories, you have no comprehension of what a short story actually is.
Yeah.
And it's more about like the real detail of one thing than trying to pack a whole story into a short amount of words.
500 words. Yeah.
So reading is huge. Read the kind of stuff that you think you might want to write. Read the kind of stuff that you think you don't want to write, and work out why you don't want to write it.
Yeah.
And then the second one is very obvious, but is write loads. Just write it all down. Don't go, I'm going to enter the Future Writers competition, I'm going to write one poem and send it off. Write loads of stuff. Sit down with it. Think about what you like about it, what you don't like. Can you take bits from here and bits from there? And just immerse yourself in the process of writing. And don't think that you have to try to write a certain way. There's something about Benjamin's F&I's work which is it captured Benjamin Zephaniah's perspective.
Yeah.
And his perspective was very unique. He was at the cutting edge of a lot of what became civil rights movements and just being a decent human being. Benjamin Zephaniah was saying a lot of these things before they became popular to say, before they became safe to say. And what he always did is he gave you his vision, his perspective, and it goes back to what I said earlier about Ollie O'Neill. We all capture things in a different way, and the best writing is when you've captured something in a really unique way. So don't try and write what you think the poem should sound like.
Yeah.
Don't try and write the story that you think people want to read. Bring who you are to the writing, and that unique perspective is what's going to make it great.
So in recent years, you've also been able to step into theatre. Into the theatre world. So can you tell me a bit about GrimeBoy then? That was obviously 2022, Please Do Not Touch, which was last month, and how the opportunities for them both actually came about in the first place.
Yeah, so GrimeBoy, which was my first kind of writing in theatre, GrimeBoy was the product of something called a Poetic Theatre Makers programme. So it was Apples and Snakes and a Birmingham rep put on this programme where they took either poets who wanted to go into theatre or theatre makers who had some kind of grounding in poetry or something about their style lent itself towards poetry. And it was write a piece. And we had mentorship from Somalia Seaton and Chris Thorpe, who are two amazing theatre makers who just a wealth of knowledge that they brought to that programme was amazing, and just simple questions that I would write something. I'd write 5 pages worth of stuff and show it to Somalia Seaton, and she'd ask me one question. I'd go, okay, I've heard all I need to do. I need to go back and work on this again. And I remember sharing something with Chris Thorpe, and he said, why did you write it? And I was like, I don't know. Let me go back and work on it. And it felt like things that feel like really obvious and simple things to consider. If you can't actually articulate them, then maybe you need to go back and look at why you've written what you've written or how you've written it. And so I went through this process, but when I started that process, my plan was very simple. It was going to be a one-person show. It was going to be Mr. Casey Bailey on stage talking about growing up wanting to be a grime MC and a rapper and all this stuff through like a kind of like poetic storytelling. And then I would do a bit of MCing and rapping. I thought, that's it. Nice and easy, job done, that'll be good. And then people started saying to me, oh, try a bit of dialogue. And I was like, well, can't have dialogue, there's only one character to me. They were like, no, write it like a story, bit of dialogue, and can we see what that looks like live rather than you telling us what happened at the time? Can we see it happen in front of us? And I started writing this story, and lots of it got scrapped and didn't do what I wanted it to do. And then the rep contacted me and said, we want to put GrimeBoy on stage. We want to do the full show of GrimeBoy. And I was like, what? Really? And I got paired up with Maddie, who's the director. Yeah. And Maddie's just a legend. And I think I owe the fact that I feel like I now can say I write theatre to Maddie. Maddie's understanding and her knowledge, and again, her questions, her direction. But like there was some of the stuff that me and Maddie were doing, which I'm quite sure that no director and writer are meant to be doing, because she was teaching me theatre. She was saying, this is your character diamond. If your character acts in this way, you have to understand why. You can't just say, oh, wow, then he said this. Well, why did he say that? What is it about what happened 10 years ago that made him say that? What is it that he wants to happen next year that made him say that? And so really getting into an understanding of how theatre works, and the fact that it's not just all my words. And this is something that I learned from Maddie and really built on with Gail, who directed Please Do Not Touch, is when you're a poet, it's me and my words on stage or on paper. But when you're writing theatre, it's like, well, what's the lighting going to do at that point in time? How's the set going to move? How's the actor going to put those words across? And there are all of these other tools and all of these other experts that are telling the story, which is like a big pressure and a big comfort all at once, because in one sense, I think that in both cases, the actors who worked on the shows, they could have had a script that was half as good and still been amazing actors and brought it to life to a certain extent. And then, so that's comforting, because, somebody else is holding this responsibility with you. But then it adds to the responsibility, because you have to do those people justice. Yeah. You have to make sure that they're going out there with the best script that they can. And so, after GrimeBoy, I had some other opportunities. I did the Emerging Writers Group at the Bush Theatre in London, which was an amazing education in writing theatre, and working with just some great writers who were on the programme and some amazing theatre practitioners who were leading it. And yeah, all that then led, I guess, to me writing Please Do Not Touch, which I wrote because I'd written a book, collection of poetry, and I'm conscious, going back to the quote I said earlier, you know, lots of people don't check for poetry because poetry doesn't check for them. I thought the idea behind the story was important, but who's going to read it? Who's going to come and read the poetry collection if they don't already engage with poetry? The same could be said for theatre, but you know, you tick another box, you open another, you not necessarily tick another box, you open up another forum for people to come and engage with this idea, and you find a new audience who would never have read the poems, but they will come and see the play.
They will come and see the show.
And yeah, now I'm just I just feel very lucky and privileged that I've always been a storyteller. But when I was younger, I was just waffling away, and now, you know, I write theatre, so it's amazing.
So, amazingly, you're also an established musician. I really don't know how you actually have enough hours in the
Got no friends, Bethan. Got no friends.
So, and obviously with music being your first love before anything else, so you've released several singles and EPs, all with a positive stance, which I think is really interesting. So can you tell me about why you think it's important for you to create positive music?
Because I didn't always. Because when I was young and I was angry, I wrote about how I was growing up. I wrote about the things that were going on around me. I wrote about the things I was doing, and none of it was positive. All of it was angry. All of it was aggressive. All of it was negative. And I'll never forget a conversation that I had with a young guy who was around me a lot of the time. And somebody had called me and said he's doing all this mad stuff. He's saying this and he's doing that, and everyone was really worried about what he was doing, but he wouldn't listen to anyone but me. So I came to see him, and I took him away, and I was like, "What are you thinking? What's going on in your head? What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, it's like you say in your songs." And he started quoting back my lyrics as reasons why he was making bad decisions. And even though, like at the time, lots of people were listening to my music, and I knew that, I was never really thinking about its impact, other than people saying I was good. That's what mattered. People say, "Oh, you're sick, man. You're sick, man. You're sick MC. Wicked." I never thought, you know, if people hear you MC about that, they're going to go and do that, or they're going to go and say that themselves, or they're going to think that that's the way they should be living their life. And when that happened, I was in a really weird place as well, because I'd applied for university. So in my head, I'm trying to take myself out of the drama that I'm in the middle of. Yeah. But I'm still saying things that are making other people think they should get into it. Right. And that was mind-blowing to me. So I was like, this is the power of words. And if you know that and you really understand that, then if I pick up the microphone again, then I have to be saying, you can achieve things, you can do well, you're not stuck because you're in a negative place. We can all do better. We can, you know, all the stuff that my music says. Yeah. Lots of it is reflective still of negative times, but with a clear understanding that you know, this is not a positive thing, and this is not glamorized, or this is not a way to live. And then lots of it is just about being positive.
So where can people listen to your music then?
All good music outlets. Stark my music. No, Spotify, Apple Music, all that good stuff. And it's just Casey Bailey, same everywhere. Yeah. There used to be a song by a rapper called Obi Trice about not having a rap name. I don't have a rap name. I'm Casey Bailey.
Casey everywhere.
Everywhere. Mr. Bailey in school. But yeah.
So this is something we like to do in every episode, actually. A Birmingham quick fire round. Okay. Right, ready?
I'm ready. Right,
would you rather go to Snobs or Pop World?
Having been kicked out of both.
That's good.
I never said I haven't. I said
I think I could say the same for myself.
Having been kicked out of both. I think Pop World. Pop World, man. Little bit of Aqua. I'm a Barbie girl. Neither of them play the kind of music that I want to listen to. So I'd much rather, you know, bit of Spice Girls, 2 Become 1. Nice. And 2 for 1 cocktails. So get me into Pop World.
Blues or Villa?
Blues or Villa.
Do you support either of them?
I'm a Liverpool fan. All the best people are Liverpool fans. Blues or Villa? That's where I support them. Blues.
Blues?
Yeah.
How so?
I'm an underdog. Do you know what I mean? The Blue Nose story is the story of Birmingham. Villa's a bit posh, isn't it? It's not.
It's posh.
Not posh at all. But it's posher than Blues. No, yeah, Blues. Blues have had to pick.
Okay, would you rather spend a few hours on Broad Street or in Digbeth?
Digbeth, because Broad Street, it's got dark memories.
Yeah. Where is your favourite Brummie landmark?
My favourite Brummie landmark, and I will elaborate on the question, Beth. No, my favourite Brummie landmark is Town Hall, and the reason is if you were in Rome and you walk past Town Hall, you would stand outside Town Hall and take photos.
Yeah.
For 20 minutes, 30 minutes, get the angle, get this angle.
Yeah.
And we walk past it in Birmingham every day, like it's not Town Hall.
Yeah.
And there's lots of places like that in Birmingham, the BMAG, the Council House, that whole area there.
That area.
Is amazing. Yeah. But Town Hall for me just epitomises it because that building is stunning.
Yeah.
And we just treat it like it's a very Birmingham thing to do. It's like Town Hall. No, mate, it's Town Hall.
Yeah.
Have a look. It's amazing.
What's your favourite Brummie word?
My favourite Brummie word is mum.
Oh, like M-O-M?
Well, the only way to say mum.
Yeah.
And I think it's because, I never realised that most people didn't say it like that.
Yeah.
Until obviously because I was in Birmingham. So we say mum. B, because my mum. I love my mum. And, my mum's no longer with us, but she's a legend. And I remember hearing Polar Bear, who's a Birmingham legend, tell a story about writing a book. And he'd written it as mum, the word mum as mum throughout the book. And his publisher said, you can't write it as mum. Like, you have to write it M-U-M. And he spoke to his mum. And he said to his mum, they didn't want me to write mum. And she said, of course, it's mum, but you wouldn't write it as mum. And he was like, what? And so his mum agreed with the publisher on the word mum.
Wow.
So yeah, mum is my favourite Brummie word.
That's nice. So if you could go back then to being a student at BCU, what is one piece of advice you'd give yourself? What do you think you've really learnt the most about yourself since then?
I think the person that I was at the time, not even necessarily so much related to what I was doing on the course, but just in general, I think the biggest lesson I've learned since then is the idea of not closing doors on myself. Something that I already had in my head because it's a gem that my dad dropped many, many years ago, or maybe a seed that my dad dropped many, many years ago that's grown and flourished. But since then, at that time, if you'd have said to me, you're going to write theatre, I would have told you, no, I'm not. I don't write theatre. I don't know how to write theatre. If you'd have told me I'd do a lot of the things that I've done since then, I'd have told you I can't, I wouldn't. And what I've learned about myself and about people in general is like we put caps on ourselves and we say, oh, no, you're not going to be able to do this, or I couldn't do that, I couldn't possibly do it. Just try. Just see what happens. And my dad used to say, don't close doors on yourself, because enough people will close doors on you in life.
Yeah.
Enough people will tell you what you can't do. You should only ever be looking for the things that you can.
So what's next then? Can you kind of give me a bit of an insight into any kind of exciting projects you've got coming up? I feel like you've always got loads coming up.
I am working. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like.
Okay.
But I'm writing around the concept of outer frame. And the idea is that in life in general, so, you go out and you take a photo with your friends, but then your one friend does something horrible, so you crop them out the photo later on in life. And you take a photo and there's a fire exit sign in the background, so you crop that out because nobody needs to see the fire exit sign.
Yep.
And in life, we're forever cropping. And as artists, we're always picking what to display and leaving a lot of things out. And so the idea of outer frame is looking at, first of all, looking at things through my own lens and then asking myself what's missing. What are the things that I'm not picking up on? But then also looking at poems and paintings and films and different works of art and saying what's happening out of frame. We're being shown this. What's happening on the other side of it? What happened that day that Ferris Bueller was off school? What was happening in school? So whatever it might be, what is happening that hasn't been captured? What hasn't been left in the crop? And what does that look like? And then just playing with that idea.
So we've had a few audience questions.
Oh.
We've got one from Joseph, who graduated in 2009. His question is, how has BCU influenced your career path so far?
So my master's at BCU was in educational leadership. And there's something about knowing something compared to having studied it.
Yeah.
or researched it. So what my dissertation was written into teacher workload. I'm sure you can imagine it's a thrilling topic, Joseph. But genuinely, it is always a topic of conversation in education. And as a school leader, people think they understand workload. And so they say, oh, we'll just, they don't have to do this thing anymore. But that doesn't necessarily solve the issue of teacher workload, because what I found out when I wrote my dissertation is teacher workload is more about your perception and your motivation to do the work than it is for the amount of work. So you can have a member of staff doing twice the amount of work who's really motivated to do it, who doesn't have an issue with teacher workload, compared to someone who you've asked to do one thing that they really don't want to do. And then you go, oh, we'll take this thing off them, but they might really like doing that. So now actually their workload feels worse, even though they've got less work to do. So what I found out is it's all right feeling like you know something, but there's a very different thing around actually researching it, actually looking into it.
Yeah.
And I think the masters, as well as teaching you something about a really specific thing, it teaches you an understanding of the power of research and what you can do with it.
Another one we've had is, what advice would you give to incoming international students who are trying to adjust academically and socially?
I guess I've never been an international student, although I have been a university student who feels like they never should have been in university and felt very, very much like a fish out of water.
Yeah.
I think my advice would be focus on a thing. So don't come in and think I'm going to integrate myself socially and master this academic challenge. But get yourself in, settle down, do your first semester and work out where you're at with your course. And then see, well, what are the societies on campus that might be interesting to me. And I think with university, I didn't realise this until probably halfway through my first year. There's a society for everyone.
Yeah.
And if you're struggling to find someone who's going to be like-minded or someone you might have fun with or whatever, a society is a great place to start. So get involved with a society and focus on, can you get get your head around that first semester of work.
Okay, last question from me then. What is it to be BCU's Alumnus of the Year? When you got told in the summer, what were your kind of like initial thoughts and what does it mean to you?
I was mind blown. I think I've said this to you before. To me, what I see is that at BCU, I kind of don't like saying this because I'm not a person who likes to blow my own trumpet.
Yeah.
But lots of people have come to BCU, like hundreds of thousands of people. So when someone says you're the Alumnus of the Year, like in my head, I'm like, you could have picked any of those people. And you didn't, you chose me. So it feels like a real privilege. It also, again, feels like a bit of a responsibility because someone's going to say, well, why him? I don't know if they are going to say that, but in my head, they might say that. So if they say, why him, I have to feel worthy of it.
Yeah.
And you do that by, doing your best and continuing to do good things. So it feels like a real privilege, a real blessing and an honour for me. Like, this is the university of my home city.
Yeah.
The campus that we're on right now, I could walk to my dad's house from here. So BCU feels very much like home to me anyway. So to be recognised in a university that feels like home but has got an international standing, has got students from all around the world, hundreds of thousands of students, and someone says, oh, you're the Alumnus of the Year, that's powerful.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today.
Oh, no?
That's flown by, actually.
Oh my gosh.
So thanks so much, Casey, for coming onto the podcast today and for all those watching online as well. Now, you may have heard that I mentioned the BCU Future Writers competition that Casey is, of course, a judge on. There's just 2 weeks left to enter, so find out more info and submit your poems and short stories at bcu.ac.uk/future writers. Thanks all, and we will see you again very soon.
Thank you.